I'm Jean, 63 years old, and I thought I was preparing for just another family dinner at my house. You know, the kind where everyone gathers around the table, sharing stories and laughter over homemade pot roast. I had spent days planning everything perfectly, hoping my daughter-in-law Madison would finally see me as supportive rather than intrusive. As I set the dining room table with our best china arranging fresh flowers from my garden, I felt that familiar mix of excitement and nervousness that comes with hosting family. Little did I know that by evening's end, I'd be standing with a microphone in my hand, sharing truths that would leave everyone speechless. Before we dive into what happened that night, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button if you've ever dealt with difficult family dynamics. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happened next. I've been a widow for 5 years now, living alone in the same house where my husband and I raised our son David. This 3-bedroom colonial with its wraparound porch and mature oak trees has been my sanctuary since Robert passed away from a sudden heart attack. After 32 years as a school principal at Lincoln Elementary, I learned how to handle difficult situations with patience and dignity. Those decades of managing challenging students, demanding parents, and complex staff dynamics taught me the value of staying calm under pressure. My son David turned out wonderful, despite losing his father when he was just 15. Watching him navigate high school grief while maintaining his grades and friendships showed me the resilience I'd somehow managed to instill in him. At 35, he's a successful mechanical engineer at Peterson Industries, designing components for agricultural equipment. He inherited his father's logical mind and my stubborn determination, a combination that served him well in both his career and personal life. He married Madison 3 years ago, after a whirlwind romance that began at a professional networking event. She's 32, a marketing manager at a growing tech startup, smart as a whip, and absolutely devoted to their 4-year-old daughter, Sophie. Madison has shoulder-length auburn hair, always perfectly styled, and the kind of confidence that comes from climbing corporate ladders in male-dominated industries. On paper, she seems perfect for David, ambitious, intelligent, and beautiful. But from the moment David brought her home to meet me, something felt off between us. Maybe it was the way she'd survey my living room like she was calculating its real estate value, or how she'd correct David's childhood stories with facts she'd obviously researched online. I tried to chalk it up to normal adjustment periods that new daughters-in-law often experience. After all, I remembered feeling protective of my own space when I first married David's father, wondering if his mother approved of me. However, as months turned into years, the tension didn't ease. It grew thicker, like fog rolling in before a storm. Madison had a way of making me feel like an intruder in my own son's life, as if my presence was something to be managed rather than welcomed. She'd schedule family activities without consulting me, then mention them casually in conversation, making it clear I wasn't included. When David suggested inviting me to Sophie's birthday party at the park, Madison agreed with the enthusiasm of someone accepting a root canal. The incidents between Madison and me started small, but accumulated like pebbles in a shoe, each one seemingly insignificant until they created an unbearable irritation. There was the afternoon I gave Sophie ice cream before dinner during a surprise visit, and Madison launched into a 15-minute lecture about sugar intake meal schedules and the importance of consistent nutritional boundaries. She spoke to me like I was a babysitter who'd violated house rules, not a grandmother enjoying a treat with her granddaughter. Then came the dollhouse incident. I'd spotted a beautiful Victorian-style playhouse at an antique shop, complete with tiny furniture and miniature family dolls. Sophie had been talking about wanting a little house for her babies, so I bought it as a surprise for her 3rd birthday. Madison's reaction was swift and cutting. She called it overstepping boundaries and suggested I return it because they preferred educational toys that promoted STEM learning. The dollhouse sat in my guest room for 6 months before David quietly retrieved it, telling me Madison had reconsidered its educational value. When I mentioned researching family-friendly vacation spots in the mountains for a potential summer trip together, Madison told David I was being too involved in their lives. She used air quotes when she said it, as if my desire to spend quality time with my only grandchild was some kind of pathological condition. David, caught in the middle, suggested we table the vacation discussion for now, which we all knew meant never. The pattern became predictable. I'd offer help, make a suggestion, or simply express interest in Sophie's activities, and Madison would find ways to shut me down. When Sophie started preschool, I asked about volunteering for classroom activities. Madison informed me they preferred to handle school involvement themselves. When I offered to teach Sophie basic piano lessons on my old, upright Madison, decided Sophie needed to focus on gross motor skills first. Each time I bit my tongue and apologized, even when I didn't understand what I'd done wrong. I'd raised a successful, kind man who became a wonderful father. Wasn't that proof enough that my instincts were decent? But I kept trying to make peace, walking on eggshells whenever Madison was around, measuring every word and gesture to avoid another confrontation. The stress of it all started affecting my sleep and appetite, but I convinced myself that persistence and patience would eventually win her over. I spent the entire week before our autumn family dinner planning every single detail with the precision of a military operation. The menu featured all of David's childhood favorites dishes that carried memories of birthday celebrations and holiday traditions. The pot roast would be seasoned with my secret blend of herbs, slow cooked until it practically fell apart, surrounded by carrots and pearl onions that had simmered in the rich juices for hours. The mashed potatoes would be made with real butter and cream whipped until they were lighter than clouds, just the way David liked them growing up. I harvested the last green beans from my garden, snapping them by hand, while sitting on the back porch, remembering all the times David had helped me with this same task as a boy. The apple pie would be made from Northern Spy apples I'd driven 30 miles to get from Morrison's orchard, using my grandmother's recipe with its perfectly flaky crust and hint of cinnamon. Every dish represented love tradition and the hope that food might bridge the gap between Madison and me. I polished the good silver service that had been my mother's arranged fresh chrysanthemums from the garden in crystal vases, and even bought new cloth napkins in autumn colors to match the changing leaves outside. The dining room hadn't looked this elegant since David's wedding reception 3 years ago. I hung string lights along the mantelpiece and displayed family photos that told the story of 3 generations, including several recent shots of Sophie that David had sent me via email. I invited my brother Tom and his wife Carol to join us, hoping their presence would create a warm, extended family atmosphere that might help Madison relax. Tom, 68, and recently retired from his job as a bank manager, had always been my anchor through difficult times. He'd helped me navigate single parenthood after Robert died, offering practical advice and emotional support when I thought I might collapse under the weight of responsibility. Carol, his wife of 42 years, was a retired nurse with the kind of gentle wisdom that comes from years of helping people through their worst moments. They'd always been supportive of me, especially during the lonely years after my husband's death, and I knew they'd help keep conversation flowing if things got awkward. Tom understood family dynamics from raising 3 daughters, and he knew how delicate relationships between mothers and daughters-in-law could be. He'd often told me that his own mother and his wife had needed years to find their rhythm, but that patience and mutual respect had eventually created a beautiful relationship. The night before the dinner, I called David to confirm timing and ask if there was anything special Madison might want me to prepare. His voice sounded strained and tired when he mentioned that Madison had been dealing with a lot of pressure at work lately and was a little stressed about the quarterly review coming up. I should have recognized that as a warning sign, but instead, I just promised to keep everything relaxed and easygoing, maybe suggesting we skip the formal dining room and eat casually in the kitchen instead. I spent Saturday morning cleaning the house from top to bottom, vacuuming under furniture that hadn't been moved in months, dusting picture frames and making sure every surface gleamed. I set the dining room table like I was hosting a magazine photo shoot, positioning each piece of silverware with mathematical precision, folding the napkins into perfect triangles and adjusting the flower arrangements until they created exactly the right ambiance. Standing in my kitchen that morning, surrounded by the familiar smells of roasting meat and baking pie, I felt genuinely hopeful for the first time in months. The house smelled like love and tradition, like all the best family gatherings from David's childhood. Maybe this dinner would be the turning point Madison and I needed. Maybe she'd see how much effort and love went into creating a welcoming space for her family. Maybe we could finally find our way to something resembling friendship, or at least mutual respect. Tom and Carol arrived precisely at 5:30, as they always did, bringing a bouquet of sunflowers and genuine compliments about how lovely the house looked. Tom handed me a bottle of wine he'd been saving for a special occasion, while Carol admired the autumn decorations and asked about my garden's final harvest. We settled in the living room with glasses of wine and my homemade cheese spread, catching up on Tom's retirement plans, Carol's new book club, and the latest adventures of their grandchildren, who lived across the country. Their warmth and easy conversation helped settle the nervous energy that had been buzzing through my chest all day. Carol asked about my volunteer work at the library, and Tom wanted to hear about the Historical Society's latest preservation project. We laughed about childhood memories and shared updates about mutual friends from church. For those precious 30 minutes, I felt completely relaxed and confident that the evening would be wonderful. Then David, Madison, and Sophie arrived 30 minutes late, which wouldn't have bothered me except for the complete lack of acknowledgement or apology. Madison walked through my front door wearing what I privately called her executive armor: a perfectly tailored black dress, designer shoes, and the kind of makeup that suggested she'd come straight from an important meeting. Her greeting was polite but distant, the way you might acknowledge a hotel concierge professional, but detached. When I offered to take her coat, she barely made eye contact. Instead, immediately scanning the room as if cataloging everything for future criticism. I noticed her gaze lingering on the family photos, particularly the ones featuring just David and me from his childhood, and her expression suggested she found something problematic about their prominence on my mantelpiece. Sophie, bless. Her precious heart ran straight to me, with her arms wide open, her face lit up with pure joy. Grandma Jean, I missed you so much. Mommy said we were coming to your house for dinner, and I've been excited all day. She wrapped her little arms around my legs with the fierce enthusiasm that only 4-year-olds possess, and for a moment, everything felt right with the world. Her genuine affection always reminded me why these family gatherings mattered so much, why I was willing to endure Madison's coldness for the chance to be part of Sophie's life. But Madison immediately redirected her daughter's attention, crouching down to Sophie's eye level and speaking in the artificially bright tone she used when correcting behavior in public. Remember what we talked about in the car, sweetheart? Use your inside voice and remember your manners. What do we say when someone invites us to their home? Sophie dutifully recited, "Thank you for inviting us, Grandma Jean." But her spontaneous excitement had been effectively dampened. Madison's smile looked painted on as she straightened up, smoothing her dress and checking her phone, as if she had somewhere more important to be. During appetizers, which I'd arranged on my mother's good serving platters, Madison took exactly one bite of my homemade herb spread, before commenting that it might have a little too much salt for Sophie's developing palate. Not, "This tastes wonderful, thank you for making it," or even, "This is delicious, but I'm watching Sophie's sodium intake." Just criticism, disguised as maternal concern, delivered with the clinical precision of someone documenting violations. I watched her examine everything with the scrutiny of a health inspector, rather than a family member enjoying a lovingly prepared meal. She studied the cheese selection like she was reading ingredient labels, questioned whether the crackers were whole grain, and asked if the grapes had been washed with organic produce wash. Each comment felt like a tiny paper cut, small enough to seem petty if I complained, but sharp enough to sting. Her body language throughout the first hour told its own story. Arms crossed defensively when I spoke directly, to her subtle eye rolls, when I mentioned activities Sophie and I had enjoyed together. During our last visit, repeated glances at her phone, as if monitoring for urgent messages that might require her immediate attention. When Tom asked her about her work, she answered in bullet points, providing information without warmth or genuine engagement. I noticed Carol picking up on the tension too. As a retired nurse, she'd developed finely tuned instincts about people's emotional states, and I caught her exchanging concerned glances with Tom. They'd been married long enough to communicate without words, and I could see them silently agreeing that something wasn't right about Madison's behavior. When we moved to the dining room, I held on to hope that the formal setting and carefully prepared meal might soften Madison's mood. The table looked beautiful in the soft light from the chandelier, with the good china reflecting the warm glow from the candles I'd lit just before we sat down. Sophie gasped with delight at the fancy table, and even Madison seemed momentarily impressed by the elegant presentation. The conversation started innocently enough, following the comfortable rhythms of family dinner talk. Tom asked Sophie about preschool, and she launched into an animated description of learning the alphabet, making new friends, and painting pictures of fall trees. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and for a few minutes, even Madison seemed to relax, as Sophie chatted about her teacher, Miss Kelly, and her best friend Marcus, who could already write his whole name. Sophie demonstrated her new knowledge by spelling out words she could recognize, counting the candles on the table, and explaining the art project she'd made from colored leaves. Her pride in these accomplishments was adorable, and I found myself thinking about all the milestones I wanted to witness as she grew up. That's when I made what Madison apparently considered a serious transgression. "You know, Sophie," I said, cutting my pot roast into smaller pieces, "Grandma has been reading about some wonderful elementary schools in your neighborhood. There's one with an amazing arts program that I think you'd love when you're ready for kindergarten in a couple of years." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees instantly. Madison's fork clattered against her plate as she set it down with unnecessary force, the sound sharp enough to make Sophie look up with concern. When Madison spoke, her voice carried that professional coolness that could freeze enthusiasm mid-sentence. "We can handle our daughter's education, Jean." The way she emphasized "we" made it crystal clear that I wasn't included in that decision-making unit. Her tone suggested I'd just suggested something wildly inappropriate, like offering to choose Sophie's college major or plan her wedding. I tried to smooth things over with what I hoped was a diplomatic response, keeping my voice light and reassuring. "Of course you can, honey. You and David are wonderful parents. I just want to help however I can, because I love Sophie so much. It's what grandmothers do, researching and sharing information that might be useful." But Madison wasn't interested in diplomatic solutions. The rest of dinner became an exhausting minefield of passive-aggressive comments and subtle corrections. When I mentioned that Sophie might enjoy the children's theatre production of Goldilocks that was coming to town next month, Madison replied coolly that they preferred to make their own entertainment choices without outside influence. When Carol innocently complimented me on teaching Sophie proper table manners during our previous visits, noting how nicely she used her napkin and said, "Please and thank you." Madison interjected that they were working on different life skills at home and developing age-appropriate independence. Every positive comment about my relationship with Sophie was met with a subtle correction or redirection. When Tom mentioned how much Sophie seemed to enjoy our garden walks during summer visits, Madison pointed out that they were focusing on structured outdoor activities that promoted specific developmental goals. When I shared a sweet story about Sophie helping me bake cookies last month, Madison noted that they were limiting sugar exposure and teaching healthy eating habits. David sat between us like a referee in a boxing match he never wanted to witness, desperately trying to change subjects and lighten the mood. He'd start conversations about work, current events, or mutual friends, only to watch them get hijacked by Madison's need to establish boundaries around every aspect of Sophie's life. His discomfort was obvious in the way he kept adjusting his collar, refilling water glasses unnecessarily, and making increasingly forced attempts at humor. Poor Tom and Carol made valiant efforts to maintain normal dinner conversation, but the undercurrent of tension was impossible to ignore. Tom tried discussing the upcoming election, while Carol attempted to engage Madison in conversation about her marketing career. But Madison's responses remained clipped and formal, as if she was enduring a business dinner with competitors, rather than enjoying a family meal with people who loved her husband and daughter. I could feel my face burning with embarrassment and frustration as the evening progressed. Here I was, in my own home, serving a meal I'd spent days preparing, with love being systematically made to feel like my presence in Sophie's life was unwelcome and inappropriate. But I kept serving food, refilling drinks, and playing the gracious hostess, even as my daughter-in-law methodically undermined me with each carefully chosen word. Dessert time arrived, like the deceptive calm that precedes a Category 5 hurricane. I excused myself to the kitchen, needing a moment to compose myself and gather strength for what I hoped would be a more pleasant end to the evening. My apple pie sat cooling on the counter, golden brown and fragrant with cinnamon, looking exactly like the ones I'd made for David's childhood birthdays and countless family celebrations. I served it warm with generous scoops of vanilla ice cream, adding a sprinkle of cinnamon and a few fresh mint leaves from my herb garden for presentation. Sophie's eyes lit up with pure delight when I placed the dessert in front of her, and she clasped her hands together like she was making a wish before diving into her first bite. "This is the best pie in the whole world, Grandma Jean," she announced with the honest enthusiasm that makes 4-year-olds such wonderful dinner companions. Her praise warmed my heart and reminded me why I'd spent hours peeling apples and rolling out pastry dough from scratch. That's when disaster struck in the form of spilled grape juice. Sophie had been gesticulating excitedly while telling us about the pie, and her enthusiastic hand movements sent her cup tumbling. Purple liquid cascaded across her white dress, with the pink butterfly embroidery spread across the tablecloth I'd inherited from my grandmother, and dripped onto the hardwood floor I'd spent an hour polishing that morning. Before Madison could react, my grandmother instincts kicked in automatically. I was up from my chair, with paper towels in hand, gently dabbing at Sophie's dress, while reassuring her in the calm voice I'd perfected during my teaching years. "It's okay, sweetheart. Accidents happen to everyone. We'll get you cleaned up in no time." Sophie looked up at me with worried eyes, clearly afraid she'd ruined dinner and disappointed everyone. I continued blotting the stain while making soothing sounds the same way I'd comforted countless upset children during my decades as a school principal. My focus was entirely on protecting Sophie from feeling ashamed or clumsy about a perfectly normal childhood accident. That's when Madison exploded like a pressure cooker that had been building steam all evening. She shot up from her chair with such force that it scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. Her professional composure, which had been cracking throughout dinner, finally shattered completely. She needs to learn to be more careful, not babied every time something goes wrong. Her voice carried the sharp edge of someone who'd been holding back criticism all evening and finally found an excuse to release it. I kept my voice gentle and steady, still focused on Sophie, who now looked ready to cry. "She's only 4 years old, Madison. Children spill things. It's part of learning and growing up." I continued dabbing at the juice stain, trying to minimize the damage while shielding Sophie from the growing tension between the adults. But my reasonable response only seemed to fuel Madison's anger further. She stood there in my dining room, surrounded by the remnants of the meal I'd lovingly prepared in front of my entire family, and let loose with words that would permanently alter the landscape of our relationship. "This is exactly what I mean," she exploded, her voice rising to a level that made Sophie shrink back in her chair. "You're so controlling. You undermine everything we try to teach her. Every single time we're in this house, you override our parenting with your opinions and your ways of doing things." The room went dead silent except for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Tom's fork froze halfway to his mouth, a piece of apple pie balanced precariously on the end. Carol's eyes went wide with shock, her hand instinctively reaching toward Tom's arm for support. David's face drained of all color as he realized his wife had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, saying things that couldn't be unsaid. Little Sophie looked completely bewildered and frightened, not understanding why Mommy was yelling at Grandma or what she'd done wrong by spilling her juice. Her lower lip began to tremble as the adult emotions in the room overwhelmed her 4-year-old ability to process what was happening. But something remarkable happened to me in that moment. Instead of the devastation or anger I might have expected to feel, I experienced a strange sense of clarity and calm. After years of swallowing criticism, biting my tongue, and trying to keep peace at any cost, something fundamental shifted inside me. My hands stopped trembling, my breathing steadied, and I felt the same determined composure that had carried me through 32 years of managing difficult parents, challenging students, and complex school politics. I realized I was done being the victim of Madison's insecurity and resentment. I was done accepting blame for loving my granddaughter and wanting to be part of her life. I was done apologizing for existing in my own son's world. Most importantly, I was done allowing someone to humiliate me in my own home while my family watched in uncomfortable silence. I looked around that dining room table at the faces of people I loved, people who just witnessed me being publicly humiliated and attacked in my own home. Tom's weathered face held a mixture of supportive fury and protective anger, the expression of someone watching a beloved family member being treated unfairly. Carol's gentle features showed the kind of maternal indignation that comes from watching someone you care about get hurt by someone who should know better. David looked like he wanted to crawl under the antique tablecloth and disappear, caught between his loyalty to his wife and his growing realization that her behavior toward his mother had crossed into unacceptable territory. His face had gone pale, and I could see him struggling with the dawning understanding that he'd been enabling this treatment through his silence and inaction. Little Sophie just looked scared and confused, her innocent mind unable to process why the adults she trusted was suddenly filled with anger and tension. Her small hands clutched her napkin as she looked back and forth between her mother and grandmother, trying to understand what had gone wrong with what had seemed like such a nice dinner. In that crystalline moment, I remembered something my late husband Robert used to tell me during the most challenging years of raising David alone, when single parenthood felt like an impossible burden. "Stand up for yourself with dignity, Jean," he'd say, while holding my hands across our kitchen table. "Your voice matters just as much as anyone else's. Don't let people walk all over you just because you're kind." I could almost feel his presence in that room, his steady strength flowing into me and giving me the courage I needed to do what should have been done months or even years ago. Robert had always believed that respect was earned through self-respect, and that allowing people to treat you poorly wasn't kindness. It was enabling bad behavior. I stood up slowly and deliberately, my movements calm and purposeful, despite the emotional chaos swirling around the table. I walked with measured steps to the entertainment center, where I'd optimistically set up the karaoke system earlier that day, planning for after-dinner fun that now seemed like it belonged to a different universe. My hands were completely steady as I picked up the wireless microphone, tested it with a gentle tap that produced a soft electronic feedback, and turned back to face my family. The small device felt solid and empowering in my grip, transforming from a toy into a tool for truth-telling. Madison stared at me with a mixture of confusion and growing alarm, clearly not expecting this response to her outburst. "What are you doing?" she demanded, but her voice had lost its authoritative edge and now carried an undertone of uncertainty. I looked directly at her, meeting her eyes with unwavering calm as my voice came through the small speaker, clear and steady. "Since you want to discuss this publicly, Madison, let's make sure everyone in this room hears the complete story, not just your version of events." I paused deliberately, letting the weight of that statement settle over the room like a heavy blanket. Then I began sharing facts that Madison had probably hoped would never see daylight, information that would provide crucial context for understanding the true dynamics of our relationship and her accusations of controlling behavior. "I paid for David's entire college education," I began, my voice steady and matter-of-fact, carrying the tone I'd perfected during school board meetings when presenting undeniable evidence. 4 years at State University, including room and board books, and even spending money for social activities. $53,000 total because I wanted him to start his adult life completely debt-free and unburdened by student loans. Madison's face started changing color, the confident flush of righteous anger fading to a paler shade that suggested growing discomfort. But I was nowhere near finished with my recitation of facts. I helped with your house down payment. I continued maintaining the same calm, factual tone. $50,000 from my retirement savings, given as a gift, with no expectation of repayment, no strings attached, and no conditions. I never asked for interest, never brought it up during arguments, and never used it as leverage when you complained about my so-called interference in your lives. The microphone picked up every word, clearly ensuring that no one could later claim they'd misheard or misunderstood the scope of my financial contributions to their comfortable lifestyle. I wasn't finished revealing the truth about my so-called controlling behavior, and I could see Madison beginning to understand that her public attack had opened a door she probably wished had stayed closed. The microphone felt solid and empowering in my hand, giving weight and authority to words I should have spoken long ago, instead of swallowing them in the interest of keeping peace. Let's continue with the financial support, I said, maintaining my calm documentary tone. I covered your wedding expenses when your parents informed you 3 weeks before the ceremony that they couldn't contribute the amount they'd originally promised. $30,000 for the venue, upgrade, premium catering package, upgraded flowers, and the photographer you insisted you had to have because she was the only one who could capture your vision. Madison had sunk back into her chair, her earlier righteous indignation deflating, like a punctured balloon as the full scope of my contributions became clear to everyone present. David was staring at his wife with an expression I'd never seen before, as if he was seeing her clearly for the first time in years. Now let's discuss the ongoing help I provide. I continued, my voice remaining steady and factual. Free babysitting for Sophie every Tuesday and Thursday, while you both work late, plus most weekends, when you have social commitments or need to catch up on projects. Professional childcare of that quality and consistency would cost approximately $1,200 per month. But I provide it gladly because I love spending time with my granddaughter. Tom and Carol were listening with the focused attention of people finally understanding the full picture of a situation they'd only seen pieces of. Carol's nursing background had taught her to gather all the facts before making judgments, and I could see her mentally cataloging everything I was revealing. But the help goes far beyond childcare. I continued warming to my theme as years of suppressed truth finally found its voice. There are the emergency pickups from daycare when your car broke down last month and you couldn't leave your client meeting. The doctor appointments I've attended when Sophie had strep throat and you were both stuck in important presentations. The homework supervision and reading practice that happens during my babysitting time, work you don't have to do when you get home exhausted from your demanding careers. I looked directly at Madison, whose face had gone pale as she realized how her accusations were sounding in light of these concrete examples of support. rather than control. "Let's talk about the phone calls, Madison," I said, my voice taking on a slightly sharper edge as I addressed the most hypocritical aspect of our relationship. The ones that come at 11 p.m. when Sophie won't go to sleep and you're calling me in tears, asking what you should do because nothing you've tried is working. The desperate requests for advice when Sophie went through her biting phase and you were getting complaints from daycare. The times you've begged me to watch her during your work trips to Chicago and Atlanta because, in your words, you trust me with her care more than any paid babysitter. Madison was now staring at her hands folded in her lap, unable to meet anyone's eyes, as the contradiction between her public accusations and her private dependence became undeniable. There are the meals I cook and deliver when you're too overwhelmed with quarterly reports to grocery shop or meal plan, I continued relentlessly. The pot roast dinners, the chicken casseroles, the homemade soup when Sophie was sick with that stomach bug last winter. The times I've done your laundry because your washing machine has been broken for 3 months, and you haven't had time to arrange for repairs or shop for a replacement. I paused to let that sink in before delivering what I knew would be the most damaging revelation. And let's not forget the emergency babysitting. When your mother had her gallbladder surgery and you needed to fly to Phoenix with 4 hours' notice. Or when your sister got married in Denver and you needed someone to watch Sophie for an entire weekend. In both cases, you called me crying, saying you didn't know what you'd do without my help, that Sophie was so comfortable with me, and you knew I'd take perfect care of her. The room remained completely silent, except for the quiet hum of the microphone and the increasingly labored sound of Madison's breathing as the full weight of her hypocrisy settled over everyone present like a suffocating blanket. I could see Madison's carefully constructed narrative crumbling before her eyes. But I wasn't done exposing the double standards that had governed our relationship for 3 long years. The microphone had become my ally in truth-telling, and I intended to use it to illuminate every contradiction in her treatment of me. It's fascinating how my involvement in Sophie's life is labeled as overstepping boundaries when I suggest activities we might enjoy together. I continued, my voice carrying just a hint of irony. But that same involvement becomes essential family support when you need free childcare so you can work overtime to impress your new supervisor, or take weekend trips to wine country with your college friends. Carol nodded slowly, finally understanding the full scope of what I'd been dealing with for years. As someone who'd navigated her own complex family relationships, she recognized the signs of someone being taken advantage of, while simultaneously being criticized for their generosity. My suggestions about schools are controlling interference, I said, making air quotes with my free hand. But my research abilities become incredibly helpful when you need me to find the best pediatric dentist after Sophie chipped her tooth or locate summer camp programs that meet your very specific criteria for educational value and convenience. Tom's jaw was set in a hard line, and I could tell he was struggling not to voice his own opinions about Madison's behavior. As someone who'd raised 3 daughters, he understood the delicate balance required in extended family relationships, and he clearly recognized that balance had been completely absent from Madison's approach to our relationship. The gifts I give Sophie are inappropriate and undermining your authority when I don't consult you first. I continued building toward my crescendo. But those same generous impulses become wonderful family values when I offer to pay for Sophie's swimming lessons, her dance classes, and the expensive art supplies for her creativity development that your budget can't accommodate. I looked around the table, making eye contact with each family member to ensure my words were landing with their intended impact. I'm apparently too involved when I express interest in Sophie's preschool activities and want to volunteer for field trips, I said, my voice growing stronger with conviction. But I become indispensable when you need someone to attend the parent-teacher conferences you can't make due to work conflicts, or when you need me to coordinate carpools with other parents because your schedule is too demanding. Madison was now visibly trembling, whether from anger or shame I couldn't tell, but she remained silent as the evidence of her contradictory treatment continued to mount. And let's discuss the most telling example of all. I said, preparing to deliver what I knew would be the killing blow to her credibility. My opinions about child rearing are dismissed as old-fashioned and not evidence-based when they differ from your preferred parenting philosophies. But those same opinions become invaluable wisdom when you're facing a parenting challenge that your books and websites can't solve. I paused dramatically, letting the weight of that contradiction settle over the room. The double standard is remarkable, really, I concluded. I'm controlling when I love Sophie and want to be part of her life, but I'm essential when you need something from me. I'm interfering when I offer help, but I'm selfish when I'm not immediately available to provide whatever support you've decided you need. The silence that followed was complete and uncomfortable, broken only by the sound of Sophie quietly humming to herself as she played with her napkin, blissfully unaware that the adult world around her had just been fundamentally altered by truth-telling. The silence stretched for what felt like an hour, but was probably closer to 90 seconds. Madison made a weak attempt at defending herself, starting to mumble something about good intentions and misunderstandings, but Tom gently shook his head in a way that suggested she should stop digging herself deeper into an already impossible hole. Madison, Tom said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades managing difficult situations. I think you should listen rather than try to explain this away. Carol was the first to speak with real substance, her voice firm but kind, carrying the moral clarity that comes from a lifetime of helping people through difficult situations. Jean, we had no idea you'd been treated this way. That's not acceptable, and it's certainly not fair to anyone involved, especially Sophie. She looked directly at Madison, with the disappointed expression of someone who'd expected better. Family doesn't work like that, dear. You don't get to accept all the help and support, then criticize and undermine the person providing it. David finally found his voice, and when he spoke, it was with a mixture of shame and anger that I'd never heard from him before. His face was flushed red, and his hands were shaking slightly as he processed the full scope of what had been happening right under his nose. Madison, this is completely unacceptable, he said, his voice growing stronger as his shock transformed into righteous indignation. What you just did to my mother, what you've been doing for years, This is not okay. This is not who I thought I married, and this is not the kind of person I want my daughter to see as an example." His voice cracked slightly with emotion as he continued. "My mother has been nothing but generous and supportive to our family. She's given us financial help that made our life possible, provided childcare that saved us thousands of dollars, and offered love and wisdom that most people would be grateful to receive. And you've been treating her like she's some kind of burden or threat." That's when little Sophie, who'd been quietly observing this adult drama she couldn't fully understand, made a decision that broke through all the tension. She climbed down from her chair with the determined movements of someone on an important mission and walked directly over to me, her small face serious with purpose. She wrapped her thin arms around my legs and looked up at me with those enormous, trusting eyes that reminded me so much of David at that age. "I love you, Grandma Jean," she said in her clear 4-year-old voice. "You're the best grandma in the whole entire world, and I don't understand why Mommy is mad at you for being nice to me." Her innocent words hit the room like a lightning strike, illuminating the absurdity of the entire situation. From the perspective of the person who mattered most, the child at the center of all these adult power struggles, Madison's composure finally cracked completely. Tears started flowing down her cheeks as she realized the magnitude of how her behavior looked from the outside, how it sounded when spoken aloud, and most importantly, how it was affecting the people she claimed to love most. The confident, controlling woman who'd entered my house that evening was gone, replaced by someone who suddenly understood. She'd been the villain in a story where she'd convinced herself she was the hero. The aftermath of my microphone moment created a strange calm in the dining room, like the quiet that follows a thunderstorm, when the air feels different and everything looks clearer. Madison sat crying quietly while Sophie remained pressed against my legs, providing the kind of honest affection that cuts through all adult complications and gets straight to the heart of what matters. Tom and Carol excused themselves to the kitchen, ostensibly to start clearing dishes, but really to give our immediate family space to process what had just happened. I could hear them talking quietly, and I knew they were discussing whether to stay or leave, ultimately deciding that their presence might provide stability, while David and Madison figured out how to move forward. David looked at his wife with an expression I'd never seen before. Disappointment mixed with determination and a growing understanding that their marriage had problems that went far beyond mother-in-law relationships. "Madison, we need to talk about this privately," he said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "What just happened here isn't okay, and I should have addressed it long ago." The three of us ended up in my kitchen, while Sophie stayed in the dining room with Tom and Carol, who'd enlisted her help in carefully wrapping leftover pie. The conversation that followed was painful but necessary, the kind of honest discussion that should have happened years earlier when the first signs of trouble appeared. Madison's apology, when it finally came, was genuine and tearful. She admitted to feeling insecure about my close relationship with Sophie, worried that she was being compared to me and found lacking as both a mother and daughter-in-law. She confessed to feeling threatened by my competence with Sophie, my ease in managing childhood crises, and the way Sophie's face lit up when she saw me. I felt like Sophie loved you more than me, Madison sobbed, her carefully applied makeup now streaked and smeared. You made everything look so easy, and I felt like I was failing at the most important job in the world. Instead of learning from you or asking for help, I tried to push you away so I wouldn't have to face my own insecurities. David acknowledged his own failures in the situation, admitting that he should have defended me sooner instead of taking the path of least resistance. I thought if I just stayed neutral, things would work themselves out, he said, running his hands through his hair in frustration. But neutrality in the face of unfair treatment isn't neutrality, it's enabling. I failed both of you by not addressing this directly. We established new boundaries that evening, agreements that honored everyone's role in Sophie's life, while ensuring that respect flowed in all directions. Madison committed to seeking counseling to address her control issues and the insecurity that had driven her to treat me so poorly. David agreed to be more active in facilitating healthy communication between his wife and mother, and to speak up immediately if he saw either relationship becoming toxic again. I set my own boundaries as well, making it clear that while I would always be available to help my family, I would no longer accept disrespectful treatment disguised as honest communication or setting boundaries. Love and support, I explained, must flow both ways to be sustainable. 6 months have passed since that transformative evening, and I'm genuinely happy to report that our family relationships have not only improved, but become stronger than they were even before Madison's behavior became problematic. The changes didn't happen overnight, and there were several uncomfortable conversations along the way. But the foundation of honesty we established that night has supported real growth and healing. Madison followed through on her commitment to counseling, working with a therapist who specialized in family dynamics and maternal anxiety. Through her sessions, she discovered that her controlling behavior stemmed from deep-seated fears about inadequacy that had nothing to do with me personally. Her own mother had been critical and demanding, never satisfied with Madison's achievements, and she'd unconsciously been recreating those dynamics in our relationship. Understanding the root of her behavior didn't excuse it, but it gave us a framework for moving forward constructively. Madison learned to recognize her triggers and develop healthier ways of handling her insecurity. More importantly, she learned to appreciate my support instead of resenting it, and to see my relationship with Sophie as an asset to their family, rather than a threat to her authority. Our monthly family dinners have become genuinely enjoyable occasions, where everyone participates honestly and openly. We established a family rule that concerns get addressed directly and kindly, rather than being allowed to simmer under the surface until they explode into bigger problems. If someone has a suggestion or worry, we discuss it immediately with respect and good faith, rather than letting resentment build up. David has transformed from a passive participant, trying to keep everyone happy, into an active facilitator of healthy family relationships. He's learned to speak up immediately when he sees communication breaking down, and he's become much more assertive about protecting all the important relationships in his life. rather than sacrificing some to preserve others. Most importantly, Sophie continues to thrive in an environment where the adults in her life treat each other with genuine respect and affection. She's old enough now to understand that the grown-ups had some problems to work through, and she's proud that her family figured out how to solve them together. Her relationship with me has remained strong and special, but it no longer comes at the expense of her relationship with her parents. I've learned important lessons too, particularly about the difference between keeping peace and enabling bad behavior. For too long, I confused avoiding conflict with maintaining harmony, but real harmony requires everyone to participate honestly and respectfully. Sometimes you have to go through the discomfort of confrontation to reach genuine understanding and mutual respect. That evening taught me that speaking truth with dignity and facts rather than emotion can transform situations that seem hopeless. When someone calls you controlling, sometimes the most powerful response is to examine who really holds the power in the relationship and whether that dynamic serves everyone involved. True family strength doesn't come from one person sacrificing their needs to accommodate everyone else's demands. It comes from mutual respect, honest communication, and recognizing that everyone's contributions have value and deserve acknowledgement. It comes from building relationships where love and support flow in all directions, rather than being extracted from one person by others. That microphone became a symbol for me of the importance of using our voices to protect our dignity and establish healthy boundaries, not to tear others down or seek revenge. Sometimes, standing up for yourself isn't about winning an argument. It's about modeling self-respect and teaching others how you deserve to be treated. The most profound lesson was learning that uncomfortable conversations, when approached with good faith and genuine desire for resolution, can heal relationships that seemed irreparably damaged. Madison and I will probably never be best friends, but we found our way to authentic respect and appreciation for each other's role in Sophie's life. Now I'd love to hear from all of you watching this story unfold. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where someone consistently took advantage of your generosity, while simultaneously criticizing you for providing it? Maybe you've dealt with family members who seemed to want all the benefits of your support, but none of the respect that should come with it. How did you handle it? And what did you learn about setting boundaries while maintaining important relationships? I'm particularly curious about those of you who've navigated the complex world of extended family dynamics. Whether you're a parent, grandparent, in-law, or anyone who's struggled with family members who seem to have different rules for taking help than they do for acknowledging it, please share your experiences in the comments below. Did my approach of calmly stating facts rather than responding with emotion resonate with you? Have you found that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply tell the truth about a situation without trying to attack or defend, just presenting information that speaks for itself? Please hit that like button if this story reminded you of the importance of standing up for yourself with dignity, rather than staying silent to keep peace. Sometimes, peace isn't actually peace. if it requires one person to absorb all the dysfunction while everyone else stays comfortable. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about family relationships, personal growth, and finding your voice in situations where you never thought you'd need to use it. I share these experiences because I believe we all learn from each other's journeys through the complicated world of human relationships. Share this video with anyone in your life who might need to hear that their voice matters, their boundaries are valid, and their contributions deserve acknowledgement rather than criticism. Sometimes, we all need permission to stop absorbing other people's dysfunction in the name of family harmony. Thank you for listening to my story and for being part of this community where we can discuss the real challenges of family life without pretending everything is always perfect. Remember that standing up for yourself with dignity and facts isn't selfish or controlling. It's necessary for healthy relationships. I hope your own family relationships are built on mutual respect, honest communication, and the kind of love that lifts everyone up, rather than requiring some people to diminish themselves so others can feel comfortable. Until next time, remember that your voice matters just as much as anyone else's, and using it wisely can transform situations that seem hopeless into opportunities for genuine growth and healing.